what's going on? It's Ben here. I'm back again today doing another video. The subject of today's video is going to be on Kenny Atkinson. He is the now former head coach of the Brooklyn Nets. As of this morning, the Nets dismissed Kenny Atkinson. They parted ways mutually, apparently. They had talked it through and decided that it wasn't the right move for him to be there any longer. I'm basically today going to be talking through probably why this happened and who I think would be potential candidates going forward for the Nets. So, as for why I think it happened, Kenny Atkinson took over this team, I think, roughly 3 years ago. He was the coach, I think, for 2 years before they were a playoff contender. Then last year they made the playoffs, and now this year they'll probably scrape by and get into the playoffs. And I think Kenny Atkinson is a guy who gets like the most out of role players and young developing players, but I don't know if he has the coaching skill set to coach the highest level of player. And what I mean by that is throughout NBA history, you have certain situations where you can point at and say, oh, this team had a coach who's good at developing young talent, and then when they get ready to contend for a title, the team fires that coach and then hires a new one who is a coach that can take top level talent to the championship level. Because it's a different skill set. Taking somebody who is undeveloped and getting them to be NBA valuable is different than taking a star and turning them into like a championship level leader. And I'm going to give you a few examples here. So Doug Collins took over the Bulls in the 80s when they had Jordan starting out and a few years with Pippen as well. And then I think he was there from around 86 to 1990. And then they fired him because the team had sort of gotten exasperated with him. And they hired Phil Jackson. And Phil Jackson was then the one who won the 6 titles with the team. But the thing is, was Doug Collins a bad coach? No. But he isn't the kind of coach that gets you over the hump. He's the kind of coach that gets you ready to be ready, essentially. So Phil Jackson took over that team, and then they got over the hump and got a title. Another example would be like the Lakers in the late 90s. They had Shaq and Kobe for a couple years. They had Eddie Jones. They had Nick Van Exel. In 1997 to 98, they had those 4 All-Stars, and yet they got swept in the Western Conference Finals. Next year, they lost to the Jazz in the semifinals. Again, they lost to the Jazz back-to-back seasons. Then, let's see here. Finally, it was in... they lost to Spurs in 99. It doesn't really matter, but they had these 3 All-Stars, and then they basically just realized Del Harris is a good coach, but he isn't good enough to take this team over the top. He's good enough to get us to the spot we need to be, but not enough to get us past the goal line. To kind of use a different sports analogy, it's like there are these coaches that can take you to the red zone, but being a good red zone quarterback is different than being a good middle of the field quarterback. So essentially, the Doug Collins, Del Harris types are the kinds that can get you down to the red zone, and the Phil Jackson type is the kind that is a good red zone quarterback that can get you in. And let me see here. A few other examples would be like Mark Jackson on the Warriors. He coached them for 2 to 3 years, and then they let him go, and Steve Kerr comes in and they're title ready. And everybody kind of says, like, would the Warriors still have won all the titles if Jackson would have been there instead of Kerr? We'll never know, but I think that they maybe would have won 1, but not as many as they won with Kerr, because it was Kerr's idea to put Draymond at the power forward instead of small forward, because Jackson had only been playing him at small forward, and so there's little coaching decisions that a guy at the top level can make that other guys can't necessarily. And there are guys who actually can do both levels of coaching, like in Eric Spoelstra. He's taken what you would think are mediocre teams and made them decent teams by getting the most out of role players and young guys. But then he also showed when he had the Miami Heat Big Three with Bosh and Wade and LeBron that he's able to manage those big players the right way. He knows how to motivate them the right way. He had good offensive and defensive schemes that he was drawing up. So there are a few coaches that can do it with young players and with older players. And the guys who are like Greg Popovich is another great example. But like a guy like Phil Jackson, he would not be good on a rebuilding team because his skill set is I can take superstars and make them ready to win championships. It's not I can take 21-year-olds and make them ready to be NBA starters. So it's just different skill sets. And I think these Nets are an example of that. And Kenny Atkinson is the guy that can get a 30-win team to be a 50-win team. But is he the guy that can take a 50-win team and make them a title contender? I don't know. It's something that the 76ers are also going through with Brett Brown right now. He's the guy that took a 20-win team and has now made them a 50-plus win team. But will he be able to get them over the hump to win a title? This season, likely not. Going forward, it remains to be seen. Other good examples that I just thought of really quickly were like um, Vinny Del Negro on the Bulls. He coached them to I believe 2 straight playoff appearances in 2009 and 10, and then they fire him. They hired Tom Thibodeau, and really the only change in the team that was a major piece was bringing in Carlos Boozer, who played roughly half the season, but they won like 18 more games than the year before and were a couple games away from making the NBA Finals. Like Tom Thibodeau knew how to take those uh, starter quality NBA ready guys and take them to the next level, whereas Vinny Del Negro is more about the guy who takes the lottery team and develops them into a playoff contender. So I just think that really is the root cause of why Kenny Atkinson did not stay with this team, is that he was more suited to coach a team like last year where they had all 20 somethings who were young 20 somethings who were hungry just to make the playoffs, and now that the expectation is title, I don't know if he's the coach that has that skill set. Now, obviously, the next logical piece to talk about would be who's going to replace him. So I've heard the Mark Jackson thing floated. I'm not sold on him. I still think he's a guy who his skill set is taking young guys and developing them into a playoff contender. Like I've advocated before, I thought he'd be a good fit on the Timberwolves because I think he could take a young group of guys and make them playoff ready. So I don't love that idea for them. Another idea I've heard floating around is if Popovich doesn't renew his contract with the Spurs after this year, he could go to Brooklyn. Would that work? Yeah, of course it would work. But the real question is, would Popovich want to do that? We don't really know at this point. We'd have to see. Another name that I've heard floated around, and this might be, I think, one that would work pretty well, is Mike Brown, former NBA Coach of the Year, former Cleveland Cavaliers head coach 2 different times. He was the head coach of the Lakers. He was the assistant head coach of the Warriors during the last, I think, 4 years. Um, why does this make sense? Okay, so number one, he's coached both Durant and Kyrie before. He coached Kyrie in his second head coaching stint in Cleveland, and he coached Durant when he was the assistant head coach in Golden State. So he has a relationship with both of those guys. Besides that, he's also had quite a bit of experience with coaching superstars because outside of those two, he's also coached LeBron for 5 years in Cleveland, and he also coached Kobe in Los Angeles, Pau Gasol in Los Angeles. Very briefly, he coached Dwight and Steve Nash in Los Angeles for a tune of 5 games. But still, my point being, he's familiar with being around superstars and handling their egos and managing their motivations and stuff like that to get them up for the right games and stuff. I mean, this is a guy who won 66 games with the Cavaliers one year, and he won 61 games with them the next year. So he is not unfamiliar with getting the most out of superstars. Um, and I've always liked Mike Brown. He's a really defensive minded head coach. I just really like the guy a lot, and I feel like he kind of got an unfair shake when LeBron left Cleveland, and people were kind of unwilling to give him a shot after Los Angeles didn't go well because he was viewed highly after Cleveland, but then LA fired him. I thought undeservedly, and so he got kind of this little black mark. Went back to Cleveland. They had a really bad year, and then um, he was the assistant in Golden State, but he really deserves another shot at head coaching, and I think this would be a great fit for him. I'm trying to think about a few other guys that I could see doing it, and there aren't a ton that I think are like clear-cut, obvious candidates. Jacques Vaughn's the interim right now. I think he'd be okay. I'm not a huge fan. Tom Thibodeau, he's rumored to be going to the Knicks, but would he fit on this team? Uh, I mean, he's a guy that took the Bulls from contender to title contender, so could I see it? Yeah, but I'd be afraid he'd ride Kyrie and Durant way too hard, and those guys are already really injury prone, so I feel like playing them 38, 39 minutes a night would be a recipe for trouble. But yeah, I think Mike Brown. Mike Brown is the best candidate in my opinion. Can't say enough good things about the guy. I think when he's had talent to work with, he's gotten a lot out of it. You look at why the Cavs never won the title with him. The Cavs' best player in '09 was their second best player was Mo Williams, and he was good, but you know, it's Mo Williams. He's on any other team, he's not an all-star. He was an all-star on that one team. And that team was great, but they were a lot like this year's Milwaukee Bucks, where you look at them and you say, okay, outside of their one player, what do they really got? And so if he is surrounded with a lot of talent like he had in Golden State, when he had to coach that final series for them, they won it against LeBron in 2018. He was basically the head coach for that series. He did a good job. They swept them. Not like they needed much help, but either way, I like Mike Brown as a candidate. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. See you next time. Bye.